Hey everybody, Dr. Dan here, and this is a quick intro to Chapter 3. And Chapter 3 is The English Come to Stay. I think on my Chapter 2 lecture I screwed up a little bit because I think I sort of got ahead of myself, but not to worry. As you read through Chapter 3, we're going to learn about the first permanent colonies, English colonies in North America, in the region that is going to become the United States. It's not the United States yet. At this point, it's North America. So in Chapter 3, we're going to get into those first settlements. And again, like I said in Chapter 3 or Chapter 2, when we were talking about exploration, I was talking about the economy and how economic forces, the desire for countries to gain wealth through this framework of mercantilism, if you will, was really the driving force for all of these explorations. Because, you know, to send a ship out, like Christopher Columbus, for example, to send a ship out, to send an exploratory party out into the Atlantic cost money. So before somebody like Spain or someone like France or the Dutch or the British would spend the money to get an exploratory force together to fund any kind of exploration, they were concerned with a return on their investment. So a lot of this stuff was national in nature. Interesting, the British take on this was more of private enterprise. So you're going to read about the Virginia Company. This is actually a company with shareholders as opposed to the government. So again, there was an economic incentive, and I think you all know what capitalism is, free market enterprise. But when you think about the Virginia Company, think in terms of capitalism and how this was a money-making venture. So Chapter 3 talks about settling of Jamestown. I accidentally put that in Chapter 2 in my last video. And so some of the things there to make a note of is John Rolfe and discovering a strain of tobacco. I think that's on page 64, discovering a strain of tobacco that grows. And tobacco, like overnight, changes the economy in the Chesapeake Bay area. So, you know, it's sort of the basic supply and demand, the rules of business, that if you want to make money, you have to have something that other people want. So by growing tobacco, tobacco that they could sell back to England and back to Europe, all of a sudden there was a revenue stream coming in, which kept people in England for sure excited about the New World as an opportunity to get wealthy. So again, back to this economic theme, that's what it's all about as we read these beginning chapters. The other thing I found interesting, going backwards on page 62, when the Virginia Company first came, you know, they were all kind of elites, and so the people they sent, one of the people they sent was a perfumer. So I think that kind of tells you, you know, you don't need someone like a perfumer. This upper crust noble society, these noblemen weren't really going to survive in the Chesapeake region because there was nothing there. So think about going to the Chesapeake as a really bad long camping trip. I mean, it was rife with disease, the water was undrinkable, it wasn't pleasant surroundings. So as you read through Chapter 3, you'll read about these various settlements and how people starved to death. They had to count on the Native Americans for food, and then when they get in fights with the Native Americans, of course the Native Americans don't want to help them eat anymore or show them how to raise crops or help them eat. So there's all these interesting themes going on of economics, of people from a noble society trying to get along out in the middle of nowhere, and also this notion of ethnicity and race, how the Native Americans and the settling Europeans tried to get along through trade, and that didn't always work out well, and it never ended well for the Native Americans. So those are a couple of things to think about. Interesting to me, on page 66, you're going to read about the Act of Toleration by Lord Calvert in Maryland. Again, it's demonstrative of this idea that you know, letting people do their own thing, or at least tolerating diversity, leads to a better outcome. And I don't think we've gotten that message yet today, but that's a theme I'd like you to think about as you read through subsequent chapters. But the Act of Toleration in 1649 is kind of a cool thing to read about. and also this freedom of religion, page 66, 67. This is long before the U.S. forms. But again, the fact that in North America there's already this idea of that this is not going to be a purely Christian area comes to roost early on. Now again, we're still arguing about that in politics today, but it's interesting to read about. And then also how gender and race roles begin to be defined. So somewhere between pages 68 and 71, pay attention to how gender is defined. In other words, even back then, this English custom of the men doing the work outside and the women doing the domestic work starts to form, and we know that a lot of those beliefs and a lot of that mindset is still in place in our society today. So when I said during the introduction that I like to trace history forward, the gender roles, that's a great example of something you can trace forward. Same with race roles. When we talk about the formation of slavery and how African Americans, or at least people with the other, with dark skin in this case, were looked upon differently than white people. So again, these themes of race that carry all the way forward to today, we're reading about back from the 1600s. So it's really amazing. So the other thing to pick up when you read about Massachusetts Bay and Plymouth, but the Massachusetts Bay settlement or colony, is how commerce and religion sort of come together. Doing the good work for God implies that hard work is favorable in the eyes of the Lord. So that's a neat thing to read about as well, because these themes of capitalism and religion are woven together throughout our history. So think about that as you read through chapter 3. Also pages 76, 77. I'm always fascinated with the biological standpoint of things. So I think most of you know that the Native Americans were largely wiped out by disease because they didn't have a tolerance for European diseases. In my other life, I work at Mercy College of Ohio, and we're mostly a healthcare college, so I'm really interested in healthcare and biology. And so this notion that hepatitis has taken out many of the Native Americans in the north, in the Massachusetts Bay Area, is of interest as well. I'm sure many of you are getting into healthcare, so it's important to understand that. And that's about it. I think, again, private ownership of land is important. Read about women and Puritans on page 81, sort of pick up some of those themes. And that's it for chapter 3. I'll be in touch with you next week. We'll discuss chapter 4. Everyone's doing a great job. I hope you're having a good semester thus far. Be safe and get in touch if you need anything. Take care now. Bye-bye.